This has nothing to do with Bitcoin. And I think that's such a barrier for people, because when people hear Bitcoin, they automatically have this baggage attached in their head, and it's not their fault. It's really not their fault. They've had 15 years of negative brainwashing, and they probably don't even realize that they've had it. But the media, the governments, everybody who doesn't want Bitcoin to succeed has been in their head saying how bad Bitcoin is. So at the end of the day, take Bitcoin out of this equation. This has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It doesn't. And kind of how I arrived at this theory late last night in bed is that I was watching a Bitcoin show, and there's two guys talking. I think one of them was American Hodl. Great guy. Great Bitcoiner's been around the space for a while, but I was just listening to the interview and the questions that they were asking. And like, you know, for those who have been through a few cycles, you know how intense people are about Bitcoin and like their journey there. And when I was watching it, I was thinking like, why the fuck am I watching this? Why am I listening to two people talk about Bitcoin? Like, am I that much of a nerd or a psychopath that I'm actually interested in them talking about Bitcoin? But then it came to me, and I realized that none of this has anything to do with Bitcoin. None of it does. What this is about is truth. What this is about is responsibility, transparency, fairness, freedom, sovereignty, and leaving that system. We're kind of at the point now where whatever side of the political aisle you're on, you know that something's wrong here. And we're getting to a point where I think most people are starting to realize that whatever side they choose, whichever way they vote, nothing is going to change in that old system. Nothing. And so people's minds are starting to wake up to this. And I think that this is the perfect time to try to really push that part, that this has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Forget that word even exists. This is so much more than Bitcoin. And so if you think about that in terms of truth, how does this bring truth to the world? Well, the world that we live in now, the system that we live in now, we have no truth. We have no transparency from our government. Zero. We pay them taxes. They take a significant amount of money out of our paychecks every week, and we have zero transparency. We have no idea what they're doing with that money. They tell us. They have all these fancy news conferences. They have all these budget reports. But do we actually know? Have they ever actually been audited? Has our Bank of Canada, has the Federal Reserve, are these places, have they ever been audited before? So when you start there, when you have no idea how much actually exists, how many dollars are out there, how many dollars they've printed in the last couple of years, how many zeros they've added to their debt, when we have no way to actually verify that, that's a big problem, because you're starting from a foundation that's totally broken. And that has a trickle-down effect into every aspect of our lives. That's kind of where we are right now. We have no truth. We have no transparency. And Bitcoin brings that, or I'm going to try not to say Bitcoin much, because again, this has nothing to do with Bitcoin. But this currency and this network and this movement, it brings truth, and it brings truth to the right people, because for people like us, for the little guy, there are tools available where you can make it very secure, very private. For the governments, for the people who need transparency, imagine this world where we're living in a Bitcoin standard. That's our unit of measurement. That's our foundation that we have, this truth. Imagine a world where we know our government's address, we can see their account, and we can see every time they move Bitcoin out of there. And every time they move Bitcoin out of that wallet, out of that address, they have to explain where it came from. And when you have that, when you start with that, that's a huge shift for the world, for transparency, because we have none of that right now. They tell us how much they spend. We're sending 2.3 billion over to Ukraine today. We're sending 1.4 trillion to Pakistan for gender surgeries. They say these numbers, but we don't know where it came from. We don't know who it got paid to. We don't know how much they got from it. If you could see an account there, a transparent account, their balance, and every time something moves out of there, you could see it, and they have to explain where that went to and who got it, that changes everything. That's the transparency that we need, and that's what the transparency that Bitcoin brings to the world. So truth and transparency, that's obviously the big one, the biggest one. Freedom is the second one. And I know that freedom, the word freedom, for some reason, people are like, oh, you're a freedom lover, or a freedom, like the convoy. They just painted these people with such a negative brush on them, for people who just wanted to make decisions for themselves. That's it. They didn't want anybody to be able to make decisions for their family, for themselves, and for their body. And they were labeled these crazy conspiracy theorists, freedom loving people. But that's what this movement is about. It's Bitcoin itself. If you read the business plan, essentially, it's called the white paper, but the business plan for Bitcoin, the idea is that they want to Bitcoin separates money from state. When you take away the ability for a small group of people to create money out of thin air, when you take that away from them, they have nothing. The only power that they have is the ability to print money, the ability to create money. And they can give it to their friends. They can bribe people. They can use it for evil without nobody knowing about it. There's no transparency. It's a complete centralized control structure that we need to get away from, because it's the only thing that matters right now. So it has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It has everything to do with freedom, separating us from the state. That's what we want. We want the ability to decide what to do with our money. You go to the bank now and you want to take out $10,000 of your money, and you have to explain to them why. Or you want to deposit money, where'd it come from? What? We've slowly got to this point where that's just been normalized, that this is how the world should be. It's not. The government, corporations, they should have no say in what we do with our money. And so it's the vessel to financial freedom. Not because you're going to get rich, which you might, just how the Bitcoin works in terms of growing demand and shrinking supply. You will get financially free, but you want to just have the choice of what you do with your money. That's the big thing there. And that's what Bitcoin provides. So kind of going to the truth and the freedom part of this is why Bitcoin works, without getting too technical around it. So if you send a Bitcoin transaction, if I sent a Bitcoin transaction to you, and I'm sure people who watch this video have never sent a Bitcoin transaction before, but if you send a Bitcoin transaction, if I sent it to you, there's nobody in between there. There's no banks. There's no corporations who have the ability to stop that transaction. So I make that transaction. That transaction gets picked up and it gets broadcast to every single person running a Bitcoin node or software on the computer. The Bitcoin network is just a giant ledger of transactions. That's all it is. And so peer-to-peer, that's what it is. I'm sending you Bitcoin. There's nobody in between that can stop that, or tell me that I can't spend it on this, or ask me what this is for. There's nobody in between there. And when you send your first Bitcoin transaction, it is such a liberating experience, because you don't have to ask anybody's permission. It's like giving somebody a $20 bill for a tip. Nobody knows I add that. Nobody knows that you have it now. So that's the truth. That's the freedom. And that's the sovereignty as well. But there's responsibility in there too. That's kind of the main friction point for a lot of people, I think, is actually having to take on the responsibility that we've never had before. We pay these fees. We deal with the censorship. We deal with the asking permission, because we don't want the responsibility of actually holding our own money, right? And so Bitcoin, you have to take on that responsibility. And one thing I would say to anybody out there who is thinking about, who's fed up with that system, who wants to try this and just see what it's like. Nobody's going to tell it, or nobody's going to ask you to move all of your assets into this, but just start with like 1 or 2% of your portfolio, move it into there, and start taking on slowly the responsibility of holding it yourself. There will be options that come up. So the longer you wait, the easier it gets, the less of an opportunity there's going to be in the future. But if you can take that on, if you can take that responsibility on, it's going to pay significant dividends in the future, because not a whole lot of people are. So start with 1 or 2%, start with $100 or $200, buy some Bitcoin, figure out how to send it to yourself, how to store it, and just start there. Start very slow, because it is a very long process, a learning process. That's why the show is called The Bitcoin Journey, because we're all just going through this thing together. None of us really have any idea what's going on. We just know that we're tired of that system and we don't want that anymore. And Bitcoin is by far and away the best option for leaving that, which is the last part here. This has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It's just the tool that we're using to do it. This has everything to do with leaving that system. And it is going to be tough. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of guts, a lot of balls, the personal responsibility. But that's what you want to get to. You want to get to a place where you're not reliant on that system anymore. You have your own money. You get to decide to do with it. You find other people who share that same mindset, that same mentality. And that's who you interact with. And you want to get to a point where, I know starting with 1 or 2% isn't going to do much for you, but at least gets you in the door. And so you want to get to a point where you're not buying Bitcoin anymore, but you're earning Bitcoin. Whatever you're doing, whatever your value you're adding to the world, you're getting Bitcoin in exchange for that. And then you find other people who are also on this Bitcoin standard, and you buy and sell from them. And then you don't have to worry about the fiat rails. You never have to touch a bank account again. Once you get to that point where you're earning Bitcoin, you're buying your food, you're paying your snow clear in Bitcoin, you're paying your dog sitter in Bitcoin, that's where you want to get to. So you're not even in that system anymore. That's the end goal. The starting point is 1 or 2%. Learn how to do it. Start very slow. Take your time. But the end goal there is to completely leave that system, where it doesn't matter what the banks say. It doesn't matter what Justin Trudeau says in a press conference. You don't care because you're not impacted by that anymore. But you have to start somewhere. So the last thing that I wanted to say here is that most people who aren't as familiar with Bitcoin, they focus solely on the price of Bitcoin. And I want you to know that the price of Bitcoin is completely irrelevant at this point. And you shouldn't even be looking at it. You should be buying Bitcoin. You should be learning how to protect that Bitcoin. And you should keep that for as long as you can. So if Bitcoin's at 58, if it's at 158, if it's at 1.58 million, it doesn't matter. You're going to keep that for 4, 8, 12. The more conviction you have over Bitcoin, the longer you're going to hold on to that Bitcoin. So go into it with a very long-term mindset, but don't worry too much about the price because it's just an illusion. Remember what I said about the starting point, a broken starting point, in terms of we have no idea how many dollars are out there, how much debt is actually out there. When you don't have a good starting point, you can't really accurately measure anything, including Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the new measuring stick. And that's what's slowly happening here, is that land prices, housing prices, vehicle prices, every asset is being repriced by Bitcoin. If you look at a house from 2015, 2020, 2024, it's gone up in fiat value, in dollar terms. It's gone up. But if you look at it in Bitcoin terms, it's gone significantly down. So let's say it went from 250 to 350 to 450, 450,000. So it's doubled in dollars in the last 10 years. Seems great. But then you compare that to Bitcoin, where it's gone from one house costing 1,000 Bitcoin to 200 Bitcoin to 5 Bitcoin. So forget the dollar, forget that. That's not what matters here. But I will tell you one thing, or two things here. These are the metrics that we need to be looking at. Because when you understand the supply and demand part of Bitcoin, these are the only things that you need to be focused on. So this says, for the past decade, Tom Lee has stated that 90% of Bitcoin's performance can be predicted by the number of wallets and their activity. Wallet numbers continue to hit new all-time highs. So you can see here that this year, the number of non-zero Bitcoin addresses has surpassed 50 million. Non-zero. So, I mean, it could be 5 sats in that wallet, but still, look at this trend. I'd say that that's a pretty important metric. All things considered, when you understand the supply and demand part of Bitcoin, the demand part matters. The supply part cannot be changed. It's written in the code how much Bitcoin there is, how much there will be next week. So that helps you fairly and accurately measure things when you know how much the supply is. You can go to a website and see how much Bitcoin there is. you can figure out how much Bitcoin there's going to be in a year from now. So the supply part will not change. We know what that is. It's the demand part. And the higher the demand goes up while the supply is going down, very basic economics will tell you what's going to happen there. And that's why people say that it's going to go up forever, because it is. Bitcoin, as more and more people adopt it, as more and more demand grows for Bitcoin, while the supply part, the denominator, does not change, it can only move in one direction, which is up and to the right. So that's the first part. That's the demand. That's one metric that I think people should be more focused on than the price. But here's the other one. And I really didn't want to make this very complicated at all. But this one's important too. I think that this is actually the main metric that we should be focused on within Bitcoin. And that is the total energy being put into the Bitcoin network. So the real beauty of Bitcoin is that nobody has the ability to just create Bitcoin. Not like our dollars, not like our debt, where they can just print and add zeros to it. Nobody has the ability to just add Bitcoin. You cannot create Bitcoin. Think about a world where the governments did not have the ability to just create money out of thin air. That alone is the cause of the majority of problems we have here in society, is that a small group of people, our government, our central banks, have the ability to print money. So you can't do that with Bitcoin. And what you have to do is you actually have to put physical energy into mining Bitcoin. You plug in a machine, it spits out a bunch of guesses, and it tries to guess the next equation. And if you guess that, you get rewarded with Bitcoin. And that's how new Bitcoin are put into circulation. And this is the chart showing the amount of energy that's going into the network, the amount of people who are plugging in Bitcoin miners. This is the chart. It's called hash rate, but it's just energy, the amount of electricity going into the Bitcoin network. So you can see here, up until 2018, it was pretty much flat for the first 10 years. And you can see what's happened since then. Bitcoin network difficulty hash rate hits a new all-time high of 92 trillion. So those are the two metrics that you want to really pay attention to, is how much demand is there for Bitcoin, how many new wallets are being created, how many new Bitcoin exchange accounts are being created, how many people are using it, what's the demand like, and the hash rate, how many people are plugging into the network, how many people are competing for that next block to try to get paid in Bitcoin. That's what you want to pay attention to, because as those go up, the supply does not change. Keep that in mind. That's the main thing that I want you to remember here. The supply does not change. And when you have a fixed and scarce asset like Bitcoin, we don't have anything like that. Historically, it was gold. It was the most scarce and hardest asset because it's the hardest to get. That's what you want. That's what you measure things off of. And up until 1971, it did a pretty good job of doing that. But since then, we moved into this very high-tech world where it doesn't make sense to operate on a gold standard anymore, because I want to buy something in Cambodia. I'm not going to send them a thing of gold. If I want to go to the coffee shop, I'm not going to shave off a thing of gold for it. It's $2,000 now. You know how small that shaving would have to be to actually pay for things in gold? But with Bitcoin, I can send it to Cambodia for almost $0, zero sats. I can do that instantly to anybody with an internet connection. At the coffee shop, I can pay for my coffee with zero fees. Nobody else is getting a fee. MasterCard is not getting a fee. The business owner gets to keep that. So Bitcoin is the hardest money. It's the most scarce. It's the most transactable. You can send it anywhere on earth with an internet connection without asking anybody's permission. Nobody can get in between that and stop it. And it's the greatest asset that's ever existed. So what I would say to you, if you're somebody who's just thinking about getting into Bitcoin, or somebody you love sent you this video, just understand that none of this has anything to do with Bitcoin. Understand that. This isn't a bunch of people who are trying to buy Bitcoin today and sell it in a week for a profit. We're not trying to trick people into getting Bitcoin. We're trying to help people understand why this is so different. And that's the main barrier there, is because it is so different than the system that we have, is that people can't really wrap their heads around it. The majority of people can't. But when they can, as things get easier, that's when the opportunity will continue to be gone. So take a little bit of time. This is very important. Take a bit of time. Take a bit of your dollars, your illusionary dollars, convert it to Bitcoin, send it to yourself, learn how to protect that, and then just go from there. Go slow, very slow. I've been in this for over 4 years now, and there's still so much that I do not know, but that doesn't matter. I know how to protect it. I've learned that, and you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. That's where people get burned. So just know that whoever sent you this or whoever's been talking to you about Bitcoin, it is truly because they care about you, nothing else. Because they do not benefit from you buying Bitcoin, and they do not hurt if you don't buy Bitcoin. Because if they don't buy Bitcoin, BlackRock's going to buy Bitcoin. The US government's going to buy Bitcoin. The Communist Party of China is going to buy Bitcoin. So it doesn't matter if you do or not. You buying Bitcoin does not impact me. These institutions are coming. They're not here yet. These countries are coming. They're not here yet. And all of these millionaires on the earth are coming, but they're not here yet. So this is the chance for the little guy to get as much of this crazy new currency, new investment, new asset, new property class while we can. So that's it. Start slow, go slow, and see where it goes. That was I felt like I didn't take a breath there for 20 minutes.